Please, my lord, he's but a child." Rowena's desperate cry pierced the winter air as she threw herself between Duke Ethelric's soldiers and the trembling boy clutching a loaf of bread. The marketplace of Tainham fell silent, traders and peasants alike frozen in terror as the armored men advanced with swords drawn. "Step aside, woman," commanded the captain, his breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. Thievery is punishable by losing a hand in these lands. Rowena stood firm, her simple linen headscarf fluttering in the wind, feet bare despite the frost-covered ground. Her hands, calloused from harvesting herbs and brewing remedies, spread wide in protection of the child. "He stole because he starves, while your lord's storehouses overflow," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I will pay his debt." The captain laughed, the sound echoing off the stone walls of nearby shops. "With what? Dirt from your fingernails?" The crowd's nervous titter died when a shadow fell across the marketplace. A man, tall as an oak and broad as a bear, stepped between the wooden stalls. Silence followed him like a loyal hound as he moved toward the confrontation. Some villagers crossed themselves, others averted their eyes. "With this," the stranger said, tossing a silver brooch that glinted in the weak winter sun. He spoke with an accent from the northern lands, each word heavy as a warhammer. The captain caught the valuable trinket, eyes widening at its craftsmanship. He glanced from the silver to the giant of a man, whose face bore scars like a map of ancient battles. Behind the stranger stood 3 warriors with painted faces and axes strapped to their backs. "Take it and leave the boy," the Northman commanded. When the soldiers retreated, Rowena turned to thank her unexpected ally, finding herself looking up at a face framed by raven-black hair, braided with small bones and silver rings. Eyes the color of a stormy sea regarded her with unexpected gentleness. "I am Wulfgar," he said simply. "My men and I seek shelter from the coming snow." That night, as Wulfgar and his warriors huddled in Rowena's humble cottage at the edge of the village, she learned of the massacre that had claimed his family when he was but a child, of his rise among the northern clans, and of the army he now commanded. Men bound by loyalty rather than birth or coin. "Why come to Tainham?" she asked, stirring the meager stew that would feed them all. "The stars led me," he answered, watching her with an intensity that made her hands tremble. "And now I understand why." Before dawn, riders bearing Duke Ethelric's banner thundered into the village, setting fire to cottages and dragging people from their beds. Rowena was awakened by screams as flames licked at her thatched roof. "The Duke demands payment for harboring northern savages," shouted the captain from earlier, now flanked by 20 armed men. Wulfgar emerged from the cottage, weaponless, yet the soldier stepped back as if facing a drawn blade. "I am the payment," he said, hands raised. "I will face your Duke." "No," Rowena cried, clutching at his arm. "Ethelric shows no mercy to those he calls enemies of the realm." Wulfgar turned to her, eyes reflecting the flames consuming her home. "I have faced crueler men than your Duke," he said softly, "but none have had something I value enough to ensure my return." He pressed something cold into her palm, an ancient ring bearing symbols of the old gods. "Keep this until I come back for it." As the soldiers surrounded Wulfgar and his men, binding their hands with iron chains, the village healer slipped the ring onto her finger and whispered, "I will wait." 3 moons passed. The Duke's men claimed Wulfgar had been executed for crimes against the crown, his warriors sold into slavery. Rowena refused to believe their words, even as winter's grip tightened and famine stalked the village. She continued brewing her healing potions and salves, trading them for food to feed the orphaned boy she had saved in the marketplace. When the Queen's messenger arrived, requesting Rowena's presence at the castle to cure the young prince of a mysterious ailment, hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. Perhaps there, she might learn Wulfgar's true fate. Perhaps there, she might find justice. What she found instead was the gleaming mockery of court, where ladies with jeweled fingers pointed at her simple dress and bare feet, where lords whispered behind goblets of wine about the barbarian's woman, and where Duke Ethelric himself sat at the king's right hand, his cold eyes following her every movement. "So this is the witch who healed the prince," Lady Sibylla announced, her laughter cutting through the great hall. "She holds more roots than prayers in those filthy hands." Rowena kept her eyes downcast, the ancient ring hidden beneath a fold of her dress, and remembered Wulfgar's words, "I will return." Outside the castle walls, unbeknownst to those within, a storm was gathering, not of rain or snow, but of men with painted shields and vengeance in their hearts, led by a warrior who had survived the impossible to reclaim what was his. The great hall of Tainham Castle blazed with torchlight, casting dancing shadows across tapestries depicting ancient conquests. Rowena stood motionless before the royal dais, acutely aware of every whisper, every suppressed laugh directed at her simple attire and unadorned appearance. "Come closer, healer," the king commanded, his voice neither kind nor cruel, merely indifferent. Though advanced in years, his eyes remained sharp beneath a golden crown that seemed too heavy for his thinning white hair. Rowena approached with measured steps, clutching her small pouch of herbs. The queen sat beside her husband, beautiful yet worn, her gaze darting anxiously toward a curtained alcove where the young prince rested. "Your Majesties," Rowena said, bowing as deeply as she knew how, "I have brought the remedy that may ease the prince's suffering." Duke Ethelric rose from his ornate chair, circling Rowena like a predator. "This is what we've summoned to save the heir, a dirt grubber who consorts with northern barbarians." His voice carried through the hall, encouraging titters from the gathered nobility. "My herbs healed many in the village," Rowena answered quietly, "including those your men left bleeding in the snow." A dangerous silence fell. The duke's face darkened with rage, but before he could speak, the king raised a hand. "The prince's health is my only concern," he declared. "If this woman's potions can succeed where court physicians have failed, I care not what company she keeps." The queen nodded desperately. "Please," she whispered, "help my son." Rowena was led to the alcove, where the small prince lay sweating and pale upon silken sheets. His breath came in ragged gasps, his skin burning with fever. She recognized the symptoms immediately, the same sickness that had swept through the poorest quarters of Tainham village, where it had claimed 6 lives before her treatment stemmed the tide. Behind the curtain, away from prying eyes, Rowena worked with practiced hands. She mixed dried bardana root with powdered myrrh, adding 3 drops of a tincture carried in a vial around her neck. As she worked, she hummed a melody her mother had taught her, a song to focus the mind and steady the heart. "Will I die?" the boy prince asked suddenly, his voice barely audible. Rowena met his frightened gaze with gentle certainty. "Not today, my prince. Not from this illness." She helped him drink the bitter mixture, then placed cool cloths on his forehead. Within an hour, his breathing eased. By the second hour, his fever broke. When Rowena emerged from behind the curtain, the queen rushed past her to find her son sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. The relief that washed through the great hall was palpable, but short-lived. "A fortunate coincidence," declared Duke Ethelric, his voice cutting through the murmurs of approval. "The fever likely broke on its own. Or perhaps," he added with a cruel smile, "the prince recovered despite this woman's witchery, not because of it." Lady Sibylla, young and beautiful in her midnight blue gown adorned with silver thread, stepped forward. "My Lord Duke speaks wisely. Any proper healer would know to wash before touching royalty." She pointed at Rowena's hands, stained green from crushed herbs. "Look how she dirties our prince's chambers with her filth." The court erupted in laughter. Rowena stood still, enduring their mockery as she had endured winter's bite and summer's scorching heat. But when Lady Sibylla snatched the herb pouch from her hands and emptied it onto the floor, something inside Rowena hardened. "Tell us, herb wife," the duke demanded. "Where is your barbarian protector now? We heard tales that this Wulfgar commanded armies, yet he surrendered without resistance when my men came for him." He leaned close, his breath hot against her cheek. "Before his execution, he begged for mercy like a dog." Rowena's fingers found Wulfgar's ring beneath her garment. She knew the duke lied. A man like Wulfgar would never beg, especially not before a lesser warrior like Ethelric. "My husband is not what you believe him to be," she said softly. "Husband?" Lady Sibylla exclaimed, her laughter echoing off the stone walls. "The savage actually married you. Did he perform the ceremony before or after slaughtering innocents in the northern territories?" The king, who had been conferring with the queen about their son's recovery, turned his attention back to the hall. "Enough amusement at this woman's expense. She has served her purpose." "But your majesty," protested the duke, "should we not question her further about the northern clansmen's movements? If she indeed shares a bed with their warlord, she may possess valuable information." The king considered this with calculating eyes. "Very well. Lady Rowena, you will remain as our guest until we are satisfied with your answers." "I am no lady," Rowena replied. Just a healer who has fulfilled her duty. I ask permission to return to my village." "Permission denied," the Duke said with satisfaction. "Guards, escort our guest to suitable accommodations." Two armored men stepped forward, gripping Rowena's arms with unnecessary force. As they led her away, Lady Sibylla called out, "Perhaps we should house her with the hounds. She already smells like one." Fresh laughter followed Rowena down the corridor to a small, windowless chamber with nothing but a straw pallet and a chamber pot. The heavy door closed behind her with a final thud, the key turning in the lock with grim finality. Alone in the darkness, Rowena finally allowed herself a moment of despair. She sank to her knees, pressing Wulfgar's ring to her lips. 3 months had passed since the Duke's men had taken him. If he lived, why had he not returned? If he commanded armies as the rumors claimed, where were his warriors? A distant sound interrupted her thoughts, a low rhythmic rumble like summer thunder. But winter still held the land in its grip, and thunder did not maintain such perfect timing. Rowena pressed her ear to the cold stone wall. The sound grew clearer. Drums, war drums, beating in a pattern she had heard only once before. The night Wulfgar and his men had sheltered in her cottage and taught her the meanings of their battle signals. This pattern had a specific meaning: surrender or burn. Rowena smiled in the darkness, clutching the ancient ring that had never lost its warmth against her skin. "He has returned," she whispered to the empty room, "and heaven help those who mocked what they did not understand." The war drums grew louder as night descended upon Tainham Castle. In the great hall, what had begun as a feast celebrating the prince's recovery transformed into a council of war. Servants scurried between tables, extinguishing unnecessary candles and bringing maps and weapons instead of wine and sweetmeats. Duke Ethelric pounded his fist upon the oak table. "Impossible! The northern barbarians would never dare attack a royal stronghold. They are disorganized savages, not an army." The captain of the guard, his face ashen, shook his head. "My lord, these are not mere raiders. They move with discipline I have never witnessed among the northern clans. Their formations are perfect." The king, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years, leaned forward. "How many?" "At least 5,000, your majesty. Possibly more arriving by the hour. They have surrounded the castle completely. No messenger can break through their lines." Lady Sibylla, who had been unusually silent since the alarm was raised, finally spoke. "What do they want? Surely they cannot hope to defeat us? The castle walls have never fallen." A guard burst through the doors, his armor spattered with blood not his own. "Your Majesty, they've breached the outer gatehouse. They had some kind of battering ram unlike anything I've seen, made of ironwood and covered in hides soaked in water to resist our burning pitch." The king rose slowly. "And their leader? Do we know who commands them?" The guard's eyes darted nervously to Duke Ethelric before answering. "They call him the Skull Reaver, your Majesty. The Northmen who surrendered rather than die claim he is unkillable. They say he escaped the Duke's dungeons by making a pact with death itself." Ethelric's face contorted with fury. "Superstitious nonsense. Wulfgar was executed. I saw his head separated from his body myself." "Was it truly him?" the king asked quietly, his gaze piercing. "Did you verify his identity beyond doubt, or merely execute a prisoner who matched his description?" The duke's silence was answer enough. "Bring the woman," the king commanded. "The healer. If anyone can confirm whether this warlord is indeed her husband, it is she." In her dark cell, Rowena had been counting the intervals between drum patterns, mapping the siege in her mind as Wulfgar had once taught her. 3 rapid beats followed by 2 slow ones. Archers in position. A rolling rhythm that rose and fell like waves. The infantry advancing. A single thunderous boom that shook dust from the ceiling. The ram striking the gates. When her door swung open, she was standing calmly, as though expecting visitors for evening tea rather than armored guards with drawn swords. "The king demands your presence," one guard announced, grabbing her arm roughly. "No need for force," Rowena said. "I go willingly to face what comes." They led her through corridors now teeming with panicked nobles gathering valuables and soldiers rushing to defensive positions. The once orderly castle had descended into barely controlled chaos. Above the clamor, the war drums continued their inexorable rhythm, a heartbeat of approaching vengeance. In the great hall, the king sat grim-faced, while Duke Ethelric paced like a caged animal. Lady Sibylla had retreated to a corner, her earlier mockery replaced by undisguised fear. "Woman," the king addressed Rowena without ceremony. "Is it your husband who leads this army against us?" Rowena met his gaze steadily. "I believe so, your majesty." "Impossible," Ethelric shouted. "I executed the savage myself." "Did you?" Rowena asked, her voice suddenly carrying an authority that silenced the hall. "Or did you execute one of his many devoted followers who offered himself in Wulfgar's place? My husband's men would gladly die for him, and some bear his marks of rank to confuse enemies." The duke's face drained of color. "Can you stop this attack?" the king asked Rowena. Before she could answer, a tremendous crash reverberated through the castle. The inner gates had fallen. "It is too late for negotiations," Rowena said quietly. "Now comes judgment." The captain of the guard burst in once more. "They're inside the lower bailey. They move like ghosts. Our men cannot hold them." The king stood, drawing his ceremonial sword. Though old, he had once been a formidable warrior. "If we must die, we die with honor. Form a defensive circle around the royal family." Ethelric seized a crossbow from a nearby guard. "The woman is our only leverage," he snarled, training the weapon on Rowena. "If the barbarian truly comes for his wife, he will negotiate when he sees her life hangs in the balance." "You would hide behind a woman?" the king asked with disgust. "I would survive," Ethelric replied. Outside the hall, the sounds of combat grew closer. Steel clashed against steel, men screamed their last breaths, and beneath it all, the war drums continued. Closer now, inside the castle itself. The great wooden doors to the hall shuddered under a massive impact. Guards braced themselves, weapons ready. Another blow made the ancient hinges groan. "Stand ready," shouted the captain. "For the king." The third blow shattered the bar across the doors. They burst open, and in the doorway stood a figure from nightmares. A giant of a man wearing armor fashioned from bone and iron, his face obscured by a helmet crowned with antlers and decorated with symbols painted in blood. Behind him stretched a sea of warriors with painted faces and weapons drawn. Rowena felt her heart leap at the sight. Even disguised by his battle regalia, she would know Wulfgar anywhere. "Hold!" Duke Ethelric shouted, pressing the crossbow bolt against Rowena's throat. "One step closer and she dies." The armored figure paused, surveying the room with unnatural stillness. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed his helmet. Gasps echoed through the hall. Where Wulfgar's face should have been scarred but human, half his visage appeared melted. The flesh rippled and discolored as though he had been burned and imperfectly healed. One eye remained the stormy gray Rowena remembered. The other was milky white, bisected by a ragged scar. His once black hair had a streak of pure white running from temple to nape. "What the Duke fails to understand," Wulfgar said, his voice a rumble that filled the hall, "is that the woman he threatens is not merely my wife." He took a single step forward. "She is my heart, and I have already survived its removal once." Something in his tone made even the bravest guard step back. "You cannot have survived," Ethelric whispered, his voice cracking. "I saw you beheaded. You saw what I wanted you to see," Wulfgar replied. "A devoted warrior who bore my markings and took my place willingly, while I endured worse than death in the darkness of your torture chambers, until the day your guards grew careless, believing they watched over a broken man." Rowena's eyes filled with tears at the realization of what Wulfgar had endured during those long months. "What do you want?" the king asked, stepping forward despite his guards' protests. "Gold? Land? Vengeance?" Wulfgar's ruined face showed no emotion. "I want what was always mine," his gaze fixed on Rowena, "and justice for those who dared mock what they do not understand." Duke Ethelric's hands trembled on the crossbow. "Stay back. I swear I'll kill her." "You won't," Rowena said calmly. With a swift motion born from years of handling sharp herb-cutting knives, she knocked the crossbow upward. The bolt flew harmlessly into the rafters as she stepped away from the Duke's grasp. For a heartbeat, the hall was utterly silent. Then Wulfgar spoke a single word in the northern tongue. His warriors surged forward like a tide of steel and fury. They did not attack indiscriminately, but moved with frightening precision, disarming the king's guards without killing them while isolating Duke Ethelric and Lady Sibylla from any hope of escape. Wulfgar crossed the hall in long strides, his eyes never leaving Rowena's face. When he reached her, he knelt, the fearsome warlord bending his knee before the simple healer. "I return to claim what is mine," he said, taking her hand and pressing his lips to the ancient ring she still wore. "Rise, husband," Rowena replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Your place is never beneath me, but beside me." As Wulfgar stood, the warriors parted to create a path to the Duke, who had been forced to his knees. "Now," Wulfgar said, his voice echoing through the silent hall, "comes the reckoning." Duke Ethelric knelt trembling before Wulfgar, his earlier arrogance dissolved into naked terror. The hall had grown deathly quiet. Even the wounded dared not moan as the northern warlord towered over his captive. "Mercy," Ethelric whispered, his voice barely audible. "I beg you." Wulfgar's ruined face betrayed no emotion. "You speak of mercy now?" He circled the Duke slowly. "Where was your mercy when you ordered villages burned for failing to pay impossible taxes? Where was mercy when you tortured a man for information he did not possess?" He stopped directly behind Ethelric. "Where was your mercy when you mocked my wife and forced her to sit among dogs?" Lady Sibylla, held firmly between two northern warriors, began to weep. "Please, we meant no true harm. It was merely court amusement." "Amusement?" Rowena stepped forward, her simple presence somehow commanding more attention than all the nobility in their finery. "You find humiliation amusing? Pain entertaining? The suffering of those beneath you a source of pleasure?" The king, who had maintained his dignity throughout the invasion, spoke from where he stood, protected by his royal guards. "Warlord, I take responsibility for what occurred in my court. If blood must be spilled, let it be mine alone." Wulfgar turned his mismatched eyes to the monarch. "You are either a fool or truly noble to offer yourself for these jackals." He gestured toward Ethelric and Sibylla. "But my quarrel is not with you, King of Tainham. Not yet." With frightening swiftness, Wulfgar drew his massive sword, a brutal length of dark metal etched with runes that seemed to absorb the torchlight rather than reflect it. Ethelric closed his eyes, awaiting the killing blow. It never came. Instead, Wulfgar drove the sword into the stone floor beside the Duke with such force that the blade sank half its length into solid rock. The impact echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. "I did not come to slaughter helpless prey," Wulfgar declared. "Any beast can kill the defenseless. I came for justice." He nodded to his warriors, who produced a small wooden chest. One opened it to reveal a collection of objects: a simple clay cup, a wooden spoon, and a frayed rope. Rowena recognized them immediately, her possessions from the cottage that had been burned. "You will choose," Wulfgar told Ethelric. "Drink from the cup, eat from the spoon, or hang from the rope. The choice determines your fate." Confusion replaced fear on the Duke's face. I don't understand." "The cup represents humility," Rowena explained, her voice gentle yet unyielding. "Choose it, and you will surrender all lands and titles, living as a commoner for the remainder of your days, experiencing the life of those you oppressed. The spoon," Wulfgar continued, "represents service. Choose it, and you will dedicate your remaining years to feeding the hungry and healing the sick in the villages you once exploited." "And the rope?" Ethelric asked, his voice breaking. "Is mercy," Wulfgar answered coldly. "A quick death rather than the slow justice you deserve." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Even the northern warriors seemed surprised by this form of judgment. The king leaned forward, clearly intrigued by this unexpected turn. Duke Ethelric's gaze darted between the three objects, calculation replacing terror in his eyes. "And if I choose the cup or spoon, you will spare my life?" "Your life, yes," Wulfgar confirmed. "Your pride, no." Lady Sibylla called out desperately, "Choose the spoon, Ethelric. For God's sake, choose the spoon." The Duke reached a trembling hand toward the chest, hovering between the cup and spoon. At the last moment, his hand darted toward the hilt of Wulfgar's sword still embedded in the stone. With a roar of effort, he wrenched it free and swung wildly at the warlord. Wulfgar did not flinch. He caught the blade with his armored hand, the metal screaming as it scraped against his gauntlet. Blood trickled between the joints of the armor, but his grip remained unbreakable. "You have made your choice," he said, voice like gravel, "not from what was offered, but from the darkness of your own heart." With terrifying ease, Wulfgar twisted the sword from Ethelric's grasp and reversed it in one fluid motion. The blade passed through the Duke's neck before he could even cry out. His body crumpled to the floor, eyes still wide with the shock of his final betrayal. Lady Sibylla screamed, collapsing in the grip of her captors. Wulfgar turned to her, bloody sword in hand. And you, who found such amusement in another's humiliation, what will you choose? The noblewoman stared at the chest of simple objects, then at Ethelric's body, and finally at Rowena. Something shifted in her expression, fear giving way to resignation, perhaps even understanding. "The spoon," she whispered. "I choose the spoon." Wulfgar nodded to his warriors, who released her. She crawled to the chest and took the wooden spoon with shaking hands. "From this day forward," Rowena pronounced, "you will serve those you once mocked. You will learn the worth of every person, regardless of their birth or station." She stepped closer to Sibylla. "And you may find, in time, that such service brings more satisfaction than all your fine jewels and cruel laughter." The king cleared his throat. "And what of me, Warlord? What judgment do you pass on the crown that allowed such abuses?" Wulfgar turned, bloodied sword still in hand. The hall held its breath. "You failed to protect the weakest of your subjects," he said bluntly. "A king who cannot control his nobles is no true king." The old monarch nodded, accepting the harsh truth. "Then I should abdicate in favor of my son, when he comes of age." "No," Rowena interjected, surprising everyone. She approached the king, still in her simple dress, still barefoot, yet somehow more regal than anyone present. A king who recognizes his failures may yet become the ruler his people deserve. She gestured to the northern warriors, who brought forward another object, a simple crown forged from iron, unadorned save for ancient runes etched along its circumference. "This belonged to the true kings of old," Rowena explained, "before gold and jewels became the measure of worth. It was passed down through Wulfgar's bloodline, worn by those who ruled through wisdom rather than fear." Wulfgar spoke, his voice softer now. "Wear it for 1 year. Learn what it means to rule with justice rather than privilege. If after that time your people judge you worthy, the crown is yours to keep." The king stared at the iron circlet, then slowly removed his golden crown and handed it to a stunned courtier. He knelt before Rowena, not Wulfgar, and bowed his head. "I accept your judgment, wise one," he said. As Rowena placed the iron crown upon the king's brow, a strange hush fell over the hall. Northern warriors and castle guards alike sensed that they were witnessing something momentous, not a conquest, but a transformation. Wulfgar turned to address the entire gathering, his voice carrying to every corner. "Remember this night, not as the day a northern army breached your impenetrable walls, but as the moment justice returned to Tainham." He extended his hand to Rowena, who took it without hesitation. Together they walked toward the great doors, the warriors parting before them like a sea before wind. At the threshold, Rowena paused and looked back at the hall, where she had been humiliated just hours before. Her gaze found Lady Sibylla, still clutching the wooden spoon. "True nobility," Rowena said clearly, "is not inherited with blood or claimed with titles. It is earned through actions and proven through compassion." As they stepped into the night, the war drums began again. But the rhythm had changed. No longer a threat, but a celebration. The siege of Tainham Castle was over. The reckoning had just begun. Dawn broke over Tainham Castle, pale light spilling across battlements now adorned with the red banners of Wulfgar's northern army. In the courtyard, warriors and castle servants worked side by side, tending to the wounded regardless of allegiance. The night's violence had given way to an uneasy peace, punctuated by the occasional wail of mourners and the steady rhythm of hammers as craftsmen repaired the shattered gates. In the castle's eastern tower, Rowena stood at an open window, watching the activity below. She wore the same simple dress as before, refusing the fine garments offered by nervous handmaidens. The only concession to her new status was a slender circlet of twisted silver holding back her hair, a northern symbol of respected wisdom rather than authority. Still preferring simplicity over luxury? Wulfgar's deep voice came from behind her. Rowena turned to find her husband leaning against the doorframe, his imposing battle armor replaced by a plain tunic and leather jerkin. In daylight, his scars seemed even more pronounced, a map of suffering etched into flesh. "I am what I have always been," she replied, crossing to him and gently tracing the scar that bisected his blinded eye. "As are you, beneath these marks." Wulfgar caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "What I endured in Ethelric's dungeons would have broken a lesser man, but each time pain threatened to consume me, I thought of you, of returning to our small cottage, of the scent of herbs drying from your rafters, of your hands sorting seeds by candlelight." Rowena's eyes filled with tears. "I waited every day. Some in the village said I was a fool to believe you lived. And now they call you Queen of the North, Wulfgar said with a hint of his old smile. A knock at the door interrupted them. The king entered, the iron crown sitting heavily upon his brow. He looked older in daylight, the events of the night having carved new lines into his face. Yet there was a straightness to his spine that hadn't been there before. "My advisors counsel war," he said without preamble. "They say I should gather forces from our allied kingdoms and drive the northern army back across the borders." Wulfgar's hand moved instinctively to where his sword would normally hang. "And what do you counsel, your majesty?" Rowena asked calmly. The king sighed. "I counsel that we have seen enough bloodshed. I counsel that perhaps Tainham has been ruled poorly for too long." He looked directly at Wulfgar. "I counsel that we listen to the man who could have slaughtered us all, yet chose justice over vengeance." Wulfgar studied the monarch carefully. "You surprise me, King of Tainham, as you surprised me, Warlord of the North." The king gestured to a table where maps and documents lay spread. "I propose a covenant between our peoples. The northern clans have strength and honor. Tainham has fertile lands and skilled craftsmen. Together, we could build something greater than either has achieved alone." Rowena moved to the table, examining the maps with a healer's precision. "You would surrender the northern territories?" "Not surrender," the king corrected. "Share, under joint governance, with fair taxation and protection for all who dwell there." Wulfgar joined them, his massive frame making the ornate chamber seem suddenly small. "And who would oversee this arrangement? Your nobles have shown little interest in justice." "That is why I propose a new position," the king said. "Protector of the northern borders, with authority to approve laws, settle disputes, and ensure fair treatment of all people, regardless of birth." He looked meaningfully at Rowena. "Someone who understands both worlds and fears neither." Understanding dawned on Rowena's face. "You cannot mean me. Who better?" the king asked simply. "The nobles fear your husband's army too much to challenge you. The common folk already whisper that you are blessed by old gods and new, and you have proven yourself wiser than most of my advisors with decades of education." Wulfgar's laugh was like distant thunder. "A healer to heal the divide between our peoples. There is poetry in that." "I have no training in governance," Rowena protested. "You have compassion and fairness," the king countered. "The rest can be learned." He hesitated before adding, "My son asks for you. His fever has not returned, but he wishes to thank the woman who saved his life." As they walked the corridors toward the prince's chambers, servants and nobles alike pressed themselves against the walls, eyes downcast as Wulfgar passed. Some made signs to ward off evil, others simply trembled. Only the children showed curiosity rather than fear, peeking from behind pillars at the giant Northman and his barefoot wife. The young prince sat propped against pillows, color returned to his cheeks. When Rowena entered, he smiled brightly. "The healer lady," he exclaimed. "Father says you're a queen now." Rowena sat beside his bed. "Not quite, your highness, but I have been offered a position of responsibility." "Will you accept it?" the prince asked, with a child's directness. Before she could answer, Lady Sibylla entered with a tray of medicines. She froze upon seeing Rowena and Wulfgar, nearly dropping her burden. Gone were her fine silks and jewels. She wore a simple woolen dress, her hair bound in a plain knot. I was bringing the prince's tonic," she stammered, eyes fixed on the floor. Rowena gestured for her to approach. "You have begun your service quickly, Lady Sibylla." "Just Sibylla now," she corrected quietly. "I have surrendered my titles as promised." She set the tray down with shaking hands. "The court physician has been teaching me the properties of healing herbs. I have much to learn." Rowena examined the tonic, nodding with approval. "The mixture is correct. You have a careful hand." Surprise flickered across Sibylla's face at the unexpected praise. "I find I enjoy the work, knowing that something I create might ease suffering rather than cause it. The first lesson of healing," Rowena said gently, "and the hardest for some to learn." Later, as spring sunlight warmed the castle's stone walls, Rowena and Wulfgar stood in the great hall where the judgment had been pronounced. The bloodstains had been scrubbed away, the broken furniture removed. In their place stood a simple wooden chair, not a throne, but a seat of judgment nonetheless. "Is this where you will sit when hearing petitions?" Wulfgar asked, running a scarred hand along the unadorned oak. "If I accept the position?" Rowena replied, still uncertain. "And if do not?" She looked up at him, at the face both familiar and forever changed. Then we return to our cottage. We plant our garden. We live quietly. Wulfgar's expression softened. Would that be enough for you now? After all that has happened? Before she could answer, the great doors opened to admit a procession unlike any Tainham castle had ever witnessed. Village elders walked alongside northern clan leaders. Farmers and merchants entered with warriors. Last came a group of children, some from the castle, some from the village, some from the northern encampments, carrying branches of spring blossoms. The king entered behind them. They have come to hear your decision, he explained. Word has spread of what transpired here. They wish to know who will protect their interests in the days to come. Rowena looked at the gathered people, nobles and commoners, northerners and southerners, old and young. In their faces she saw hope mingled with apprehension, trust shadowed by the memory of betrayal. One of the village elders stepped forward, a woman as old and gnarled as an ancient oak. We heard what you said to the nobles, Rowena of Tainham, that true nobility comes from actions, not birth. She gestured to the simple wooden chair. If that is so, then you are the noblest among us. A northern warrior with a face painted half blue stepped beside the old woman. The Skull Reaver commands our loyalty, he said in heavily accented speech, but it is his heart who has won our respect. He thumped his chest in salute to Rowena. One by one, representatives from every group spoke, of hopes for peace, of fears allayed, of trust cautiously extended. When they finished, all eyes turned to Rowena. She stood silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of expectation. Then she looked to Wulfgar, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I accept, Rowena said finally. Not as ruler, but as protector. Not as noble, but as healer. For what is a divided land if not a body in need of healing? A cheer rose from the assembly, hesitant at first, then swelling until it filled the great hall and spilled into the courtyard beyond. As the celebration continued, Rowena slipped her hand into Wulfgar's. This is not the life we planned, she whispered. Few receive the life they plan, he replied, his voice rumbling beneath the noise of the crowd. But sometimes fate gives us the life we need instead. In the weeks that followed, Rowena established her seat of judgment not in the castle, but in a simple stone building erected between the village and the northern encampment. She continued to wear her plain linen headscarf and often went barefoot, a silent reminder of her origins and her values. Wulfgar remained by her side, his fearsome reputation ensuring her decrees were swiftly obeyed. Yet those closest to them knew that in private chambers, it was often his counsel that tempered her decisions, his experience that guided her through political complexities. Lady Sibylla, now simply Sibylla the healer's apprentice, devoted herself to learning the art of medicine, her hands growing as calloused as Rowena's had once been. In time, her laughter returned, but it was warmer now, never cruel. The king wore the iron crown for the promised year, then another and another, finding wisdom in its weight that gold had never taught him. Under his rule, guided by Rowena's influence, Tainham flourished as never before, and the tale spread throughout the kingdom and beyond, of a humble woman who stood barefoot before mockery, of a warlord who chose justice over slaughter, and of a court that learned too late that true power resides not in titles or possessions, but in the strength of an unbroken spirit. In the village square of Tainham, a simple monument was erected, not of marble or gold, but of weathered wood and iron. Upon it, 3 objects were carved: a cup, a spoon, and a rope. Beneath them, words that would be taught to generations of children. Choose wisely. Justice remembers what mercy forgives. Throughout the land, nobles learned to approach the barefoot protector with respect rather than condescension, for behind her stood not just an army, but a principle that had proved stronger than castle walls, that dignity cannot be granted by birth, nor taken away by mockery. It can only be earned through actions that honor the spark of nobility in every soul, however humble their beginnings. And sometimes on quiet evenings when duties allowed, Rowena and Wulfgar would return to the rebuilt cottage at the edge of the village. There, they would sit beside a simple hearth, her sorting herbs while he carved wood with his scarred hands, both content in the knowledge that their greatest strength had never been in armies or titles, but in the bond between them, a bond that had survived humiliation, torture, and the weight of unexpected power. For in a world where strength was measured by steel and status, they had discovered a different truth, that love, like justice, needs neither crown nor castle to change the course of kingdoms. In the hearts of the people, this truth became their greatest legacy, more enduring than any monument, more powerful than any army, and more transformative than any law. The humble had risen, the mighty had fallen, and the world was better for it. In the tapestries that would one day hang in great halls throughout the realm, they would be remembered not as conquerors, but as healers of a wounded land, not as rulers who commanded obedience, but as protectors who inspired devotion, not as nobles born to privilege, but as simple souls who found greatness in compassion. And in every depiction, Rowena would stand barefoot, a silent reminder that even the smallest gesture of defiance can, in time, topple the mightiest of thrones. Throughout the kingdoms, people would gather to hear the tale of the humble woman mocked at court and the warlord husband whose army surrounded the castle. But the story they remembered was not of vengeance or bloodshed. It was of transformation, of justice tempered with mercy, of a world where even the highest might be humbled and the lowest might rise. A world where true nobility is earned, not inherited. A world where mockery yields to respect. A world healed by hands once stained with herbs and blood. A world forever changed by a barefoot woman and the warrior who loved her enough to choose justice over vengeance.